Hello, and welcome to the first of my new series, This Week I Watched. This series will be covering a lot of one-off films that I watched over the previous week. And because of the one-off nature of this series, I will not be including a ranking of the films, but I will be still including a rating for the films, but instead of at the very end of the video, it will be right after I finish talking about that film. If you like the way I'm doing it in these videos, then please leave a comment saying that you actually like this way of doing it, and maybe I'll do them that way in the franchise and direct reviews. With that out of the way, let's get started with our first movie that we're going to be covering in this video, West Side Story from 1961, so the original film. In the slums of the Upper West Side of Manhattan, New York, a gang of Polish-American teenagers called the Jets compete with a rival gang of recently immigrated Puerto Ricans, the Sharks, to own the neighborhood streets. Tensions are high between the two gangs, but two kids, one from each rival gang, fall in love, leading to tragedy. The original West Side Story is streaming on Hoopla and Hollywood Suite in Canada and on HBO Max and Hoopla in the US. We begin with a 5-minute prologue that just added time to an already reasonably long movie. Then there's another minute and a half of overhead establishing shots of New York City. We finally get started with what I found to be a cheesy and almost slapstick beginning musical dance number. When they finally started singing in the first song, the Jet song, I didn't enjoy their singing voices. Well, after that section, this film starts to trend upward heavily. The scene at the dance and the musical number Tonight chorus felt like it was ripped straight off Broadway and put on screen. I felt every musical number after the first one was enjoyable. That's not to say it never dipped again, such as the Sharks versus Jets fight that looked cheesy despite dramatic elements. When Maria learns of Bernardo's death, I also felt the score created a melodramatic moment. The ending was excellent and tied the entire story together in a nice, neat little bow. I rated this film a 4 out of 5. Now let's move on to the 2021 remake done by Steven Spielberg of the same story, West Side Story. Love at first sight strikes when young Tony spots Maria at a high school dance in 1957 New York City. Their burgeoning romance helps to fuel the fire between the warring Jets and Sharks, two rival gangs vying for control of the streets. West Side Story 2021 is streaming on Disney Plus in Canada and on Disney Plus and HBO Max in the US. Some things I liked in this film better than the 1961 film, that one of them, they cast Latinx actors in the roles of the Puerto Rican characters, unlike the original where they cast white actors and just put them in brownface. Or with Rita Moreno's case, they put her in brownface even though she is Latinx. Another thing, Steven Spielberg brought a more cinematic quality to the story, drastically decreasing the cheesiness of the musical numbers from the story. Some of the elements they added into the story also fleshed it out a bit more, like Tony confronting the Jets before they got into the fight, Chino and Tony working together to get into the warehouse, and Chino talking with the Sharks about his plan. Those things I felt added a lot of value to this film. I enjoyed that the Puerto Rican characters spoke Spanish, unlike in the original, but still I wish they had added the Spanish words within the English subtitles to allow people to know, who know a little bit of Spanish, to somewhat interpret the lines. They did have some of the lines, the Spanish dialogue, in the English subtitles written in the Spanish language, but I wish they had done it for more of that. Some of the problems I had with this film is one of them is there was some pacing and story structure / location elements of the original that I preferred, such as Tony and Maria in the dress shop and Maria's ending speech. Those things were done better in the film, and just some of the places where the actual scenes took place in the original I felt were more interesting. Another thing, Tony felt more like a stalker in this film. Maria keeps telling him to go away, but he just keeps on coming and keeps on coming. And with the Ansel Elgort issues, controversies surrounding him, it just really is hard to ignore that feeling that his character gave off. Speaking of Ansel Elgort, he and potentially other cast members seemed auto-tuned for their singing performances quite frequently. So that was a little bit difficult to deal with. Overall, I would say that while this is still an enjoyable adaptation of this story, I ended up preferring the original film just a bit more. I rated this film a 3.5 out of 5. Now let's move on to a new film from this year, No Exit. Stranded at an isolated highway rest stop in the mountains during a blizzard, a college student discovers a kidnapped child hidden in a car belonging to one of the people inside the building, which sets her on a terrifying life or death struggle to discover who among them is the kidnapper. This film is based on a book by the same name. It is available for streaming on Disney Plus in Canada or on Hulu in the United States. Before watching this movie, I thought that this would be a horror film based solely on the title and poster. In reality, it's more of a mystery thriller that, while it had a good concept, didn't work in execution. Most of the acting in the movie is very one note, and if you didn't predict at least one of the kidnappers, you're oblivious to the obvious. There was only one twist that really got me, and it just kind of came out of nowhere for that character, making it seem like it was only added for increased tension to the plot. One thing I will say is that this film had quite a few beautiful shots. If I had made this film, I would have leaned more into the mystery element, leaving the audience guessing. Maybe you wouldn't know who did it until the very end. To do that, you'd have to make sure that all characters are either seem too good to have done it, or make each character seem just off kilter enough that it could be anyone or everyone. Overall, I would say that it's what you should expect from a 90-minute movie that went straight to streaming. This film I rated a 2.5 out of 5. Let's move to the next film that I watched on International Women's Day, The Eyes of Tammy Faye. An intimate look at the extraordinary rise, fall, and redemption of televangelist Tammy Faye Bakker. In the 1970s and 80s, Tammy Faye and her husband, Jim Bakker, rose from humble beginnings to create the world's largest religious broadcasting network and theme park, and were revered for their message of love, acceptance, and prosperity. Tammy Faye was legendary for her indelible eyelashes, her idiosyncratic singing, and her eagerness to embrace people from all walks of life. However, it wasn't long before financial improprieties, scheming rivals, and scandal toppled their carefully crafted empire. This film is available for rent or purchase in Canada or on HBO Max in the United States. I don't have too much to say about this movie, but I will say that I thought the performances were pretty good, especially Jessica Chastain, who sang Tammy Faye's songs in this film. I always give an actor props for actually singing instead of lip syncing to the originals. The story is where this movie didn't deliver. I'm not a fan of the decade-spanning stories since it doesn't allow the story to go deep enough in each segment of their lives. They could have improved this story by either focusing on a single event of time or time period, or making it a limited series where they can go and dive deep into each decade as part of one episode. I would probably have preferred the documentary. I'll end up by saying their attempts at aging Andrew Garfield failed because all you can see is a few gray hairs on the same face from the 1960s all the way up to the 1990s. I rated this film a 3 out of 5. Now let's move on to the next newer film, Fresh. Frustrated by scrolling dating apps only to end up on lame, tedious dates, Noah takes a chance by giving her number to the awkwardly charming Steve after a produce section meet cute at the grocery store. And that's just the beginning, but I won't say any more in case you haven't seen it. This film is available for streaming on Disney Plus in Canada or Hulu in the United States. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend going in knowing very little, so maybe skip this review and come back a little bit later. This movie showed how hard it is for women on these dating apps because of toxic men. We have Chad, who she went on a terrible date with and is just the worst. Or is he? We'll get to that later. Then, when she gets home, she matches with another guy who she responded to only once, and he is immediately following that response creepy and later sends an unsolicited dick picture. This is all a setup for when she meets Steve, who is great at flirting, but generally seems like a good guy. At least he's different than the other douchebags. It's only 30 minutes into this story that its tone really gets flipped on its head from rom-com to horror. That's when you start to see how even Steve is not what he seemed. This movie was not necessarily frightening, but it was 100% horrifying. I had been cringing quite a bit while watching it. It was really hard to watch, but it was a really fun watch for me. I have to chalk that up to the screenwriter, Lauren Kahn's desire to write a film that appealed to both horror fans and non-horror fans. I myself am not really a big horror fan, so this was actually something that if you are not a horror fan, but are okay with something that can get a little bit grotesque, you might find enjoyable. The cinematography, especially in the last 30 minutes, worked effectively to increase tension. The main two cast members, Daisy Edgar-Jones and Sebastian Stan, were great, and the side characters also generally worked, especially Jonica T. Gibbs and Dayo Okeniyi. I was glad to see Andrea Bang of Kim's Convenience fame getting more roles in this film, even though it was a bit of a smaller role compared to what she had done previously. Now, I'm going to go into some full spoiler stuff, so if you really don't want to know, then please skip over. Maybe you can check out my rating at the end. I could see some lines hitting differently upon rewatch, or if you know some of the later aspects of the film, I myself kind of knew what was going to happen with Steve, that Steve was going to be a cannibal. For example, Steve tells Noah that he doesn't eat animals, which is accurate since he eats people. I also found that it was incredibly funny when Paul pieces out from saving the women after hearing gunshots. It shows he's thinking about the horror trope about Black people dying first in horror movies and doesn't want to be a part of that statistic. I rated this film a 4 out of 5. Now let's move on to a film that came out just this past weekend, The Adam Project. Adam Reed, age 12, is still grieving the sudden death of his father a year earlier, and walks into the garage one night to find a wounded pilot hiding there. This mysterious pilot turns out to be the older version of himself from the future, where time travel is in its infancy. He has risked everything to come back in time on a secret mission. Together, they must embark on an adventure into the past to find their father, set things right, and save the world. The three working together, both young and grown Adam, come to terms with the loss of their father and have a chance to heal the wounds that have shaped them. Adding to the challenge of the mission, the two Adams discover they really don't like each other very much. And if they're going to save the world, they're first going to have to figure out how to get along. This film is streaming on Netflix in both Canada and the US. It is a Netflix original. This was a fun and entertaining sci-fi film. I thought Walker Scobell did an amazing Ryan Reynolds impression, and he was hilarious while doing it. Ryan Reynolds took a little bit more time to get warmed up to, but I was able to enjoy his character more as the film went on. I thought the effects were pretty good, and the references were great since they weren't just making a copy of those items or films, like how they used the lightsaber. And it was really cool to see that type of stuff. Comparing this film's villain to Ryan Reynolds and Sean Levy's last collaboration, Free Guy, the villain in this film is less over the top and as such, more enjoyable. I love Taika Waititi, but he can sometimes be a bit much. Jennifer Garner was good as the mom character, and her chemistry with Mark Ruffalo must not have been hard to do since they previously co-starred in 13 Going on 30. This film was right up my alley with sci-fi, action, comedy, and heartfelt moments. I rated this film a 4 out of 5. Now we're going to move on to the final film I'll be covering in this video, another film that came out recently this past weekend, Turning Red from Pixar. Mei Lee is a confident, dorky 13-year-old torn between staying her mother's dutiful daughter and the chaos of adolescence. Her protective, if not slightly overbearing mother, Ming, is never far from her daughter, an unfortunate reality for the teenager, and as if changes to her interests, relationships, and body weren't enough, whenever she gets too excited, which is practically always, she poofs into a giant red panda. This film is streaming on Disney Plus in both Canada and the US. It is currently exclusive to there, except for some theaters. I noticed a similarity between this film and Encanto, with both dealing with the theme of generational trauma and how to reconcile as a family. I really enjoyed Encanto, and I think this film does a slightly better job of showing the reconciliation, since it's much more insular and has fewer characters that they had to deal with. I love this film's message of accepting yourself for who you are and not trying to change because someone tells you to. I also noticed a similarity between Soul's ending and this film with a giant kaiju-style fight. However, while Soul's dealt with it on a more philosophical method, this film dealt with it with an amazing action scene and an emotional reconciliation between mothers and daughters. I thought the animation was fantastic, from the production design that showcased Toronto as itself, which is generally not a thing that you notice as a Canadian, as somebody who is living in Toronto. They use it a lot as a stand-in for other cities. And the character design that allowed for easy identification of all the characters. It was also just insanely beautiful how it looked in the astral plane and in the fantasy sequences. I'm calling it right now. This movie will be the next year's Best Animated Feature Film award winner across the award shows, although they may have some competition from Pixar's other film coming out later this year, Lightyear. I rated this film a 4.5 out of 5, and in my Pixar rankings, it is number 7, just behind Toy Story 3, although I almost could put it just a little bit above. I'm really debating on that. I'll have to probably watch a few of them just to really get in that ranking set. Thank you for watching this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. If you have any suggestions or information you'd like to share, maybe what you felt about these movies, please leave a comment down below. If you'd like to see more from me, hit the subscribe button. Next week, I will probably be doing another one of these, This Week I Watched, but I will be doing it for a lot of films that are on my Criterion Challenge for this year. A lot of them will be directed by women because this is Women's History Month, and we just recently passed International Women's Day. So I want to watch more films directed by women this month. Thank you again for watching, and have a great day.